5 ways to pray for Israel? Let's take a look. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. Just recently, we did a couple of episodes talking about Israel, the war in Gaza, and Christian response to all of that. And of course, in the last week, I happened to see more Facebook posts on it, and I saw one in particular that I thought went along well with some of what we talked about, and this would be a perfect opportunity to address some of this and tie it in with what we talked about in the podcast. So this person posted 5 ways that you can pray for Israel, and go figure, it's a repost that somebody else made up. But the first thing they mentioned was to pray for peace in the Holy Land, and they used Psalm 122:6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, may those who love you be secure. Now, we talked about this verse in the second episode that we did on Israel. It is not saying that Christians should only be praying for peace in the land of Israel. In fact, if you read the context of that psalm, it is an Israelite writing to other Israelites to seek peace in their own land. In fact, it's quite possible that that psalm was written during the time of the divided monarchy, in which case the writer would be saying to his own relatives, basically, his own distant cousins, let's stop fighting each other and have peace in our land. So there's nothing wrong with praying for peace in any part of the world, but we shouldn't stop with Israel. A lot of Christians might pray a little bit for America and then for Israel, but really it was only specified to Israel because the author of that psalm was Jewish. So if he wrote it today in America, he would be saying to pray for the peace in Washington, D.C. Or if he was British, he'd pray for the peace of London. The idea is to seek peace in whatever your own land is. Secondly, they use that same reference again, but they say pray for the protection of innocent people in Israel. And while, again, I have no problem with praying for safety for innocent people anywhere, we have to realize that that is not said anywhere in that psalm. Now, the Bible is not meant to be a proof text, and I think we do it a great disservice when we just find something that seems relatively similar and slap a Bible verse on there and say, oh, see, this proves it. There's nothing in Psalm 122 that talks about saving innocents particularly. The psalmist was just talking about praying for peace for all Israelites, regardless of their moral capabilities or qualities. So, again, nothing wrong with praying for innocents to be safe, but let's not use the Bible to proof text that. And if you need the Bible to proof text praying for the safety of the innocents, maybe we need to reconsider our own theology. That's not something that you should need a proof text for. Third, pray for justice for Israel and blessings on the nations who come to her aid. And this uses Genesis 12, God's promise to Abraham, saying, I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who treat you with contempt or who curse you. Now, we talked about this more in the podcast episode, so if you haven't listened, I highly recommend you go check that out. But this is not saying that God is going to bless someone who drops $100 in the offering plate of a Jewish ministry, or who gives aid to Israel. This was saying that God was going to redeem all of humanity using the people of Israel. Abraham was a response to the Tower of Babylon event where God scattered the nations. And so Abraham was the first step in reclaiming all of the nations back to him. It's not that there was anything particularly special or innately good about Abraham and his descendants. In fact, the Bible very often says that God chose them not because they were a great nation or anything special, but because he wanted his power to be shown through them. So this is not saying that we have to support every military endeavor that the modern nation state of Israel makes. It is saying that we should be supporting God's plan to redeem humanity through the Israelites back to himself. And if you're a Christian, you believe that he did that in Jesus. So this is something that was already fulfilled at the time of Christ. And now, as we as Christians live out his message of hope, love, peace, forgiveness, grace, so forth and so on in the world, that is how we bring justice and blessing to the nations, and it goes back to Israel because Jesus was Jewish. Fourth, pray for Christian believers in Israel. This one's quite the stretch. It might be the biggest stretch out of all of them. Isaiah 62:6, Jerusalem, I have appointed watchmen on your walls. They will never be silent day or night. There is no rest for you who remind the Lord. Now, I made sure to wear, I don't know how well you can see this here, but when I was in college, my sports team group, and, it was like a fraternity, sorority sort of thing, but they just called them leagues because, we can't have that sort of thing going on at a Bible college. It was called Watchmen. Definitely taken out of context a little bit, and so is this verse. This is hundreds of years before Jesus, hundreds of years before Christians. There is nothing in this verse that is talking about Christians in the land of Israel. In fact, this was God speaking through Isaiah to the children of Israel around the time of the exile and saying, I know things look really bad now, but I'm actually still protecting you all. I haven't forgotten you all. You're going to be back in the land. You're going to be safe. So this is also something that was fulfilled hundreds of years before Jesus. Now, again, nothing wrong with praying for Christians in Israel, but number one, we don't need a proof text for that, and number two, there is no proof text for that, and this is absolutely not one of them. Fifth point and final one, pray that Christ would be made known as God fulfills his eternal purposes for Israel. And yet again, they use the same proof text, because when there's not actually something that proves your point, you kind of got to stretch the things that you think do prove your point. So again, this is another case where this is what Jesus was about. Jesus was the fulfillment of God's eternal purpose for Israel, which was to bring all of humanity back to himself. Time in the Bible is like an hourglass on its side. It's a funnel that's broad on the start, and then it narrows down to the cross on how God reaches out to humanity, starting with Abraham and then going into Jacob and Judah and eventually David, and it goes down through the line like that. And then Jesus is that crux point where it starts to go out broader and broader after that as well. And we as Christians, whenever we spread the good news, are able to be a fulfillment of that, because we are helping to reclaim the nations back to God. But this is not something that is way off in the future. This is something that was actually enabled at the cross and is done every time someone follows God because of Jesus, because he himself was a Jew. So we don't have to be reading the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other, wondering what's going to happen in the next big current event. This is stuff that was fulfilled in Bible times, and we get to continue being a fulfillment of today. But sharing things like this on Facebook just tend to cause either more fear, anxiety, or they just get amens from people who already believe it. And I would also point out, this leaves off the side of innocence in Palestine. It's great to pray for the protection of innocent people in Israel, but what about people who aren't Israeli citizens? What about people on the other side of the conflict? We should be praying for peace in that land as a whole, not for victory for one particular side, which is what a lot of Christians often mean when they say pray for the peace in Jerusalem. They really mean pray for the desolation of everyone else and victory for Israel. If you really want to follow what that verse says to pray for peace for everyone in Palestine.